By the time of his graduation from West Point in June of 1861, Custer's insubordination had helped him compile a record of infractions never before equaled in the history of the Academy.
Custer would finish last in his class, but he wasn't stupid by any means. Whenever he was running into serious trouble, he'd hunker down and work his way back. And so, in one sense, he led a chaotic, fun-filled life, but on the other, there was a real discipline there.
Although Custer was fresh out of West Point when the war began, his exploits on the battlefield proved that he was more than ready for command.
He's a guy who sees his chance to rise during the war, and he recognizes that the only capital he has is his life. He's got to put himself in a post of danger if he wants to distinguish himself. And so he does. He's on the firing line with his troops. He gets horses shot out from under him, and he dresses so that he's a mark for any sniper on the field. He's got a huge sombrero with a feather in the cap. He's got a big scarlet neckerchief. He's got a velvet jacket with gold braid. He's asking for it.
Custer didn't just look the part. He acted the part. He never asked anyone to do anything he wouldn't do himself. In the bloodiest war in all of American history, he's in the thick of the fighting from the first battle to the last battle, and he's barely scratched. It's just absolutely remarkable. Custer's luck. He called it, and he came to believe in it.
Cited for bravery in his very first engagement at the Battle of Bull Run, Custer distinguished himself in a string of brilliant cavalry actions that made the dashing young officer a darling of the nation's press. The New York Tribune proclaimed, "Future writers of fiction will find in Brigadier General Custer most of the qualities which go to make up a first-class hero." The men of his Michigan brigade, many of them twice his age, idolized Custer, following him into some of the war's most violent engagements, proudly sporting the bright red neckties that he wore.
The Civil War was a time that called for Custer's brand of leadership. Somebody who was daring and brash and inspiring to the people who fought underneath him.
Remember, on a Civil War battlefield, everything is visual. He has to be a great actor. He has to get out in front of his men and perform courage.
And that image of Custer, not at the back, but at the front, with his sword out, that's the Custer that put him on the cover of Harper's Weekly and that everybody came to associate him with.
Now, with his triumph at the Battle of Gettysburg, Custer had become one of the most famous officers of the war. He was known as the Boy General. He stayed on the front lines until the very last day of the conflict, receiving the flag of truce when General Robert E. Lee finally surrendered at Appomattox on April 9th, 1865. Custer's most admiring commander, Lieutenant General Philip Sheridan, gave him the table upon which the peace terms were signed, along with a note to Custer's wife, Libby. "Permit me to say, madam," it read, "that there is scarcely an individual in our service who has contributed more to bring about this desirable result than your gallant husband."
One of the things that's remarkable about Custer, the number of photographs that are made of him. He understood that there was a new kind of visual imagery at work in society and that it could be manipulated.
Custer's costumes and his long cascading hair, right, all that cavalier look. What's he playing into there? Well, partly he's drawing on popular literature, and he's drawing on the legend of the knight-errant and the cavalier, and he kind of mixes them all together to come up with this figure.
He grows his hair long and perfumes his hair with cinnamon oil. And he takes pride in his girlish good looks, in his fine complexion. And I think one of the things that makes him so prominent as a figure is the success with which he mingles this feminine, masculine, gentleman, roughneck combination and brings it off.
There are men who look at him at the time and think, this guy looks like a circus performer. There are people who look at Custer and say, what a freak. But most of the time, it's working for him. Just about every public figure in the late 19th century had to have some kind of theatrical persona. Custer had a profoundly theatrical sensibility. He had a way of arriving that everyone would see and would pay attention.
During the months following the surrender at Appomattox, Custer would find peace more challenging than war. He had won a battlefield commission to Major General of Volunteers, but was now a lowly captain in the regular army.
In this post-war army, it's shrunk from an army of, at the end of the war, was something like 1.5 million men under arms to, 30,000, something like that. The officer corps is shrunk way down, and nobody's going to get promoted. People are going to spend 30 years at whatever rank they happen to be in.
He was not leading men to war for a good cause anymore. The military was being downsized dramatically. During the Civil War, there was a battle, it seemed, every day. I mean, a pace of life that just could not be sustained, and suddenly it was over. He was at sea.
But he really just doesn't know what to do. And so he turns to the one person that he actually counts on the most, the person that has the most influence over him, the person who really is the bedrock upon which he stands, and that is his wife, Elizabeth Bacon Custer.
Oh, Audie, we must die together. Better the humblest life together than the loftiest, divided.
Need I repeat to my darling that while living, she is my all, and if destiny wills me to die, my last prayer will be for her. My last breath will speak her name, and that heaven will not be heaven till we are joined together.
They had first met in the small town of Monroe, Michigan, where Custer had come as a boy of 14 to live with his half-sister and attend school at the Stebbins Academy. He had returned in the fall of 1862, a dashing 23-year-old captain on the staff of General George McClellan, and one of Monroe's most eligible bachelors. 3 years younger than Custer, she was known as Libby, the radiant and sophisticated only daughter of Monroe's prominent judge, Daniel Bacon. She was also one of the most sought-after girls at the Young Ladies' Seminary.
Libby was not immediately impressed by Custer when they first met, but he was so persistent. He told her that he had vowed to marry her from the get-go, and he just kept at it. And even though her father disapproved, she ultimately was won over by the fact that she seemed to be the supreme thing for Custer in his life.
She was a catch, and she was pretty, too, and very bright, and I think that would have appealed to Custer. They had a real passionate relationship that both of them idealized.
Oh, how dear he is. I love him so. His words linger in my ears, his kisses on my lips. I forget everything sometimes when I think of him. If loving with one's whole soul is insanity, I am ripe for an insane asylum.
The two of them put forth this image of the Cavalier and his lady, which is very pleasing to Libby, because she doesn't want a mundane life. She wants a life of excitement.
Custer's astonishing rise through the ranks swept aside whatever reservations Judge Bacon may have had about the match, and the couple were married on February 9th, 1864. After a brief honeymoon, Custer was called back to duty. His new wife headed straight to the front to be with him.
Libby, contrary to almost all Army officers' wives, wants to be there. So she is, in many instances, in a tent or in a house very near where the fighting is occurring. And this is a pattern that they would keep to throughout Custer's life. She was in her own way a very charismatic, stalwart figure.
There was a sense that his career was a joint project between the two of them. I think Libby saw in Custer a kind of aspiration to greatness, and she wanted to be a part of that.
When the fighting forced them apart, they wrote to one another incessantly, in letters that sometimes ran 20 pages or more. He called her my rosebud, or my darling sunbeam, or sometimes my little Durl. She called him Audie, a childhood rendering of his middle name, Armstrong, or dear old Standby, or sometimes just Beau. And from the onset, they saw their lives as inseparable from one another.
When I think of how successful I have been of late, and how much has been said of my conduct and gallantry, I think she will hear of it and will be proud of her boy.
Remember, I cannot love as I do without my life blending with yours. I would not lose my individuality, but would be, as a wife should be, part of her husband, a life within a life. I was never an admirer of a submissive wife, but I wish to look to my husband as superior in judgment and experience, and to be guided by him in all things.
They had a true partnership. She did everything she could to promote her husband because she really felt that he had something to offer and that he was making history.
Finally, in the fall of 1866, Custer received an offer to join the 7th Cavalry.